first glance, Taekwondo is known as a martial art that focuses primarily on kicking and punching techniques. After further investigation into its history, you will find that grappling techniques do exist within its movements. This is apparent through sparring, and the actual blocking techniques are not used through chambering. However, methodologies from these techniques are executed.
The reason for the existence of these grappling techniques is its historical link to the Japanese martial art of Shotokan.
While the name Taekwondo is only about 55 years old, the origins of the art and its grappling techniques go back to the late 19th and 20th centuries.
Nearly all of the founders of Taekwondo were born during a time when there was a very strong Japanese influence on Korean culture due to the Japanese occupation of that country. In fact, until 1909, all Korean schoolboys were required to learn the art of judo.
Furthermore, all the early founders of Taekwondo held at least a black belt rank in Japanese striking or grappling arts such as Shotokan or Judo, or even the grappling intensive Chinese martial art of Tai Chi Chuan.
When we examine the patterns of Taekwondo, we can see many similarities between Shotokan and Taekwondo. Many Japanese kata were Koreanized and given Korean names. For example, the Japanese pattern Impi was renamed Yunbi, or Teki being renamed as Chilgi, Basai as Paul Sek. We also see similarities in fighting style between Shotokan karate and traditional Taekwondo. Both styles use a balanced kicking and punching offense with similar linear footwork patterns.
It is in the Japanese influence that we find the basis for the grappling techniques. If we look back to the 11th century, when Japanese warriors of the Minamoto clan fled to Okinawa, they brought their art, Minamoto Bujutsu, with them. These warriors believed that any type of combat, be it striking, grappling, or even weapons work, all relied on similar movements. Students in this style would be taught a movement and then shown how it relates to striking, grappling, or weapons use.
Later, in 1377, the king of Okinawa pledged allegiance to China. This resulted in an influx of Chinese martial arts, specifically Kempo. Later influences in 1477 and 1609 further led to improved fighting skills in the Okinawan people. It's important to remember that by this time, most Japanese or Okinawan martial arts patterns were of Chinese origin. Because of this influence, they were heavily loaded with Chinese joint locking techniques, or Chin Na. It was at the end of the 19th century when things changed. The focus of martial arts shifted from that of a tool for self-preservation to one of self-enlightenment to promote health, spirit, morality, and national identity. Because of this change in focus, the violent past of the Japanese Okinawan martial arts was sanitized or sportified and taught as physical education in all elementary schools.
Before this happened, techniques weren't named high block or low block. They were simply taught as striking, grappling, weapon techniques. Because traditional Taekwondo patterns share many similarities with older Japanese patterns, many of the grappling applications still remain buried in the movements of the individual patterns. For example, if you compare traditional Taekwondo patterns to Shotokan kata, many similarities become obvious. In addition to Korean forms having the exact same movements as Japanese kata, such as Basai or Palsek, Kankudai, and Kangsukan, or Jian or Jaeon, others have very similar combinations of movements. There are profound similarities between Heian Nidan and Wanyo, Heian Shodan and Chunji and Dangun, and Teki Shodan, Nidan, and Sandan and Poan.
When we put this book together, our intentions were to show how the techniques could be used. The application of our techniques has infinite uses. When it comes to utilizing this book to enhance your Taekwondo training, the biggest thing you must do is focus not on the name of the technique you are practicing, but instead focus on the movement itself. Ask yourself, what is the purpose of this movement? Why use a palm here instead of a fist? Why have different chambering techniques for all the blocks and strikes?
Through our cross-training, we discovered different uses for techniques, which helped us grow in our martial arts training and teaching. Cross-training as martial arts was necessary for the early masters, not for enjoyment, but because their lives depended on it. So when you look at the patterns, try to remove a technique from the flow of the pattern and see if it could be applied differently. Try to perform the technique in a different plane or with your body in a different plane. Use your patterns to try to do more than just learn your Taekwondo. Try to understand it while getting a feel for what the old masters were trying to tell you. We hope this book will take your training to another level and encourage you to cross-train with other arts. Thank you, and most importantly, have fun in your training.
The twin palm ready stance, feet together, palms facing down, knees slightly bent, is used in the Hwarong, Chaeyoung, and Samuel patterns. It's used to defend against probably the most basic grappling attacks, the double underhooks. The double underhooks need to be defended against as a striker because once the grappler has double underhooks on you, he then controls your body and how he can move you. So, as White comes in to get double underhooks on you, first thing I do is I want to bring my hands down and in, and as I drop my arms down as the pattern shows, dropping my knees lowers my weight and I've broken his double underhooks on me. The outer forearm block is utilized in many different patterns throughout Taekwondo. It's first seen in the Chunji pattern, the very basic white belt pattern, and it's the first of the blocks to initiate the push-pull motion of stepping into the back stance, executing the block, and pulling the other arm back to the hip. It's in that simultaneous push-pull snapping motion that you have the joint locking ability that you do. White comes in and he will attack with a same side wrist grab. As he does so, I use the pulling hand to wrap up his arm. As I step into my back stance, the outer forearm block will hit just at the elbow joint or just above it and pull in. I'll then use the snapping motion of my hips combined with the pulling of the arm to pull White over, breaking his balance. As you'll be able to see from the video here, the position of the pulling arm also gives you a wrist locking technique while you also simultaneously execute the elbow and shoulder lock. The scooping block is first found in the Wanyo pattern. It is an exaggeration of the outer forearm block. The outer forearm block, which we saw earlier, is performed from a back stance. The scooping block is generally done from a longer front stance, and it has a much longer, deeper scooping motion, combined with that same pulling technique of the outer forearm block. In this case, we'll use the scooping block as a wrestler's ankle pick. When Steve comes out, if for whatever reason you're starting at a lower level, you're on the ground, you're on your knees, and you have an attacker in front of you, you can use your pulling hand to grasp behind the ankle. Use the scooping block hand as you pull with your hip, just as you would do with the block. Pull with your hip, catch with the fist as you come through, and pull the leg off balance. From here, simply drive forward using your hips as you would during a front kick and push forward, performing a takedown technique. The twin outer forearm block, as first seen in the Yul Guk pattern, it's also seen in other patterns throughout the curriculum, consists of two simultaneous outer forearm blocks performed at the same time, generally done from a front stance, either stepping forward or stepping back. Both arms are blocked simultaneously and snapped together. While you lack the push-pull that you would have with your other blocks, this blocking technique, the hips are still active to drive the blocking technique. We're going to use the twin outer forearm technique to block against the wrestler's shot. The shot is one of the primary ways that a wrestler will try to take down a striker by changing levels or dropping down to a lower plane and moving in and grabbing the hips and pulling you down to the ground. So the way we'll use this is as he comes in for the shot, I'll use this technique to block his forward movement and hook under his arms while performing what's called a sprawl, which, if you're familiar with the front stance technique, all it involves is using the back leg front stance technique while taking the front leg back as well. So this comes here, and then dropping the legs down, moving your hips away from the attacker. The twin palm block is probably one of the more important techniques you can learn when defending against a grappler, because this twin palm block, while when you're performing it in your Taekwondo motions, it doesn't seem to have all that many useful applications against a grappler or a wrestler or a judo player. It does have a lot of good applications because those individuals, grapplers very specifically, have an expression. He who controls the hips controls the game. So when they try to come into you and create and take away the space that's there, by using that twin palm block, you can negate that move that they have done. For instance, when Steve comes in and attempts to get underhooks, to get his double underhooks on me this way, I can attempt to move my hand, maybe one hand in, and use the twin palm block here to stop him from getting close. If Steve attempts to do a hip throw on me, Stepping over the hip throw, I can use the twin palm block against his hips to prevent him from getting all the way in to be able to perform the throw. So keep in mind, whenever you have an attacker coming in closer than your traditional kicking or punching range, the twin palm block can often give you that space that you need to get back to the range that you prefer. The X block can be performed from either a back stance or a front stance. The X block can also be performed low with open hands, closed fists, or high with open hand or closed fist. The X block is one of the few techniques that we've used that can actually have a submission property to it. To perform the high X block, when you open the lapels, one arm goes in, keep the same palm facing you position. Snake the thumbs behind to the back of the neck, and then pull your wrists together to perform the choke. Keep in mind also, if you're not comfortable with the choking technique, you can use this as a gripping technique to provide some good, strong ability to move your opponent. You can combine it with knee strikes, you can combine it with knees to the leg, you can even combine it with kicks to the leg. For the low X block, it's performed in much the same way. Put one knee on the belly, one foot by the head, slide the hands in, perform the same motion with the wrists, pulling them into one another to perform the choke. The lunge punch is probably the first striking technique taught to most individuals in generally any striking art. The lunge punch has the punching arm in front along with the front leg, so you have the left arm and the left leg in front. The most important facet of the lunge punch is that you have the push-pull motion of the hips that we spoke about earlier with the outer forearm block. It is, however, more pronounced in the lunge punch because of the stepping technique. Because you're stepping into the technique, you really have the opportunity to snap your hips and pull at the same time. Now when Steve comes in, you can perform the same technique. Grabbing the wrist, grabbing the lapel, perform the same push-pull motion, step back, pull the arm, push the lapel to the chest, and you can pull your opponent off balance. From here, you can use many of the techniques with which you're already familiar. You can do your boot-to-boot sweep to take him off balance. You can perform leg kicks with your round kicks. You can perform front leg, kicks to the body, kicks to the head. Any of these are possible once you take your opponent off balance using that push-pull motion. The knife hand strike is the first open hand technique that most people will learn in Taekwondo. The knife hand strike is performed with the little finger side of the hand. It can be performed in many different ways, inward, outward, as well as downward. In this case, we will use the knife hand strike as well as its preparation as a takedown technique or an off-balancing technique against an attacker. As Steve comes in, you can use that push-pull motion that was mentioned before by grabbing the lapel. As we start in and step to the back stance, step behind with that front leg as you perform an elbow strike to the face. This elbow strike will serve to soften up the attacker so that you can perform your sweeping technique. Once you strike with the elbow, as the knife hand comes around, push with your hips as you lift this leg up to perform the takedown technique. The ridge hand technique, or the reverse knife hand technique, is one that utilizes, rather than the little finger side, the thumb side. The thumb is pulled across the palm to strike with the fleshy portion of the hand. The ridge hand is generally performed from a front stance with a diagonal circular motion. The ridge hand is also used as a breaking technique in a downward motion as well. The ridge hand has a submission application that just like the knife hand did. As Steve steps in, he'll perform a swinging looping punch that's often as an attacking technique. Use your front stance to step under the attack and step around and behind. Use that ridge hand to grab your arm, wrap the head, and squeeze for a side choke. The technique can also be performed from a grabbing attack. Grab at the shoulder, grab the lapel, push with one hand, slide the wrench hand across, and perform the same technique. The twin high punch is performed much the same way you would perform a high reverse punch or a high lunge punch. Both punches are executed simultaneously, and you use a hip snap forward to back to provide power. In this case, the twin high punch can be used as a knuckle choke. To perform the knuckle choke, reach inside the lapel with your fingers, thumbs on the outside, on either side of the Adam's apple. From here, just perform the punch. Push your arms away, then you squeeze them together, and you get the choke. The back high elbow technique, elbow strike, is one of the basic striking techniques of Taekwondo. It consists of lifting the arm to shoulder level, and then with either open hand or closed fist, snapping the hips and pulling the elbow straight back. Now when Steve comes in, you can use this technique, reach into the lapel and grab. Use it as another hip snapping technique to where when you snap your hips, you pull the attacker in toward you. It's not a technique where I try to forcefully pull him in. You can use this technique to either go to a striking counterattack, pop the hips, strike with the elbow, pop the hips, knee strike. You can also use it as a choking technique if your opponent has on loose-fitting clothing. As I jerk him in this way, dip the head down and loop my arm around his neck in what's called a loop choke. From here, stop him from moving by grabbing the arm and pulling up on the neck. The first combination from the pattern is from Chun-Ji. We'll begin with the right lunge punch, turn 180 degrees into the right downward block. The thing to look at when we start to examine the patterns is the footwork. Remember, Chun-Ji is the most basic of the Taekwondo patterns. So many people who've done this pattern over the years start to think, wouldn't it be easier just to turn the other way? The lesson to be learned is in the footwork. This, as the most basic of the striking patterns, sets up the footwork for the most basic of grappling patterns. When Steve comes in, we use the footwork to set up your basic shoulder throw, one of the more basic throws of grappling. Grab. Your lunge punch becomes the grabbing arm. Step in. Here comes your 180-degree turn to load up, and then when you step forward, there is your throwing technique. So, from the beginning, grab, step, load, throw, finish into this stance. Dangun. Dangun pattern follows the Chun-Ji pattern. From this pattern, we're taking the right high punch and the turn into the left square block. What this will show the progression from the 180-degree turn into the 270-degree turn. This is important because it helps to teach the practitioner that leverage becomes more important than strength when it comes to throwing. When Steve comes in, use your lunge punch as a lapel grab, just like we did before. Grab, grab. What the turn does, by turning that amount of movement, it allows you to take your opponent off balance and get them in a position to where their weight is off the ground and you can throw them. So, grab the lapel, use the momentum of the turn to set up the throw. In the third example, we will look at the Dosan pattern, specifically the twin reverse inner forearm block, front kick, lunge punch, reverse punch combination. This is a common combination in a lot of striking arts, and what it does is it really allows as an instructor for you to show the students the importance of a kick rechamber. In this case, the rechambering technique actually acts as a sweeping technique. When Steve comes in, he's going to attack, grabbing attack lapel, it could be a choke, either one. Use your twin inner forearm block combined with your hip action to give yourself the space that you need. Do your front kick past the attacker and then rechamber it to sweep him down to the ground. Then use your punches, 1, to stabilize him onto the ground, 2, to drive across the throat. If there's no gi on, use it as a choking technique, much like the twin high punch. The next combination will be from the Wanyo pattern. We'll use the initial square block, knife hand block, lunge punch combination to set up a basic arm throwing technique. This isn't involved, or it doesn't involve as much of the hip action as your judo throwing techniques do that we covered in Chunji and Dangun. But for this one, it is more of a joint locking technique that results in a takedown. Steve comes in, starts a rear wrist attack, step away, and use your hips to help clear over your head into your square block. From here, use your knife hand to pull off balance, and then step into your lunge punch for the takedown. What you're doing is using the elbow as a lever to cause the throw to occur. So, one more time. In one smooth motion, turn, knife hand, lock. The next combination comes from the Yoguk pattern. It is right hooking palm, left hooking palm, right lunge punch. At the intermediate level, what this combination teaches is the use of the hips for the creation of power. When Steve comes in, use a typical lapel grab for this. Use your hips to move him off balance. Load the hips, bring the arm across, turn with the hips. Don't force with the arm, turn with the hips to pull him off balance. Come back the other way once you control the arm to break down the posture more. Once this is here, use the hand lunge punch as a lapel grab, then utilize your push-pull action, pull at the shoulder, push at the lapel as you step into the takedown technique. The Jungun pattern. This one acts as a continuation of the Yoguk pattern from before in utilizing the hips for your power. We're going to combine the pressing palm with the turn and the hook punch. Steve comes in. We'll use the pressing palm as an attacking technique or a defending technique. He steps in, grab the wrist, use the pressing palm just above, closer to the shoulder, above the elbow. Lift as you keep this flat. You know the technique works or is effective when your partner rises up on their heels, on their toes. So from here, use the push-pull motion to pull this to the hip. Use your hook punch as a clothesline technique to pull him in while tripping with the foot. Now, for our Taekwondo purposes, do the same thing and use your Taekwondo techniques to finish it. Pressing palm off balancing technique, pull, trip, pivot, round kick. This combination from the Taige pattern utilizes the mountain block, left downward block combination. One of the things with Taige is often asked is what are the use of all of these mountain blocks, the series of mountain blocks forward and back. Mountain blocks are best used, can be best used as a joint locking technique because of their push-pull nature. Steve grabs as a lapel grab. Use one side of the mountain block to trap the hand, use the other side of the mountain block to lock the shoulder so that the elbow in the middle is locked firm. From here, use that mountain block and the twisting of your hips to pull him forward. Then, use your downward block to take him off balance the other direction. So, from here, grab in one sweeping motion, turn, step, and down. In Hwarang, you'll notice that some of the seemingly static striking techniques, like the overhand knife hand to lunge punch to downward block, can be combined into one fluid grappling technique. Attacks with a wrist grab combine the hip swing, knife hand to lunge punch as one technique. Grab onto the lapel, step to the low block, sweep the leg, and go down into a takedown. For the Chung Mu application, we're going to combine the knife hand square block, stepping forward into the knife hand high block, inward knife hand combination. The way this one works is with a twin wrist grab, step back to pull the attacker off balance and use your knife hand square block to lift his arm. See the hip action that occurs as I go into the square block. From here, pull the left arm into your next high block as I step forward with the knife hand, and you effectively lock the elbow joint and the shoulder joint. From here, you keep stepping forward into your front stance, and you can take your attacker down and control it. In the Kwangye pattern, we combine the push-pull action of the arms with a forward and backward stepping motion. We have the hooking block with the right arm, stepping back into the low double knife hand block. What that allows us to do is to have a greater hip action for increased power on the takedown. Steve attacks with a lapel grab. We step to the side, off the line of attack, and use the hooking block to control the side of the arm. Turn into it, reach across the opponent, your attacker, and grab the lapel. Step back into your double knife hand block, dropping to the ground. Note here that you do have control of the opponent by the neck and by the arm. The Po-On pattern allows you to gain skill in controlling an opponent without moving your feet. For example, when Steve comes here and attacks with a wrist grab, using the hips, pulling the attacker in, using the hips, pulling the attacker over, using the hips, controlling the attacker, all while utilizing the hip action. Gaebaek pattern has one of the hand techniques that's not often used in a striking context, and that's the arc hand strike. However, the arc hand does have a very good grappling application. Steve attacks with a wrist grab. If we combine the high block, low block arc hand combination from the pattern, we can see that it can be used very easily in a circular motion as a way to control the attacker.